Could you state your full name?
John Hampton Luckadoo,
And where were you born?
Chattanooga, Tennessee.
And where were you living at the time of Pearl Harbor?
In Chattanooga.
In Chattanooga.
I was attending the University of Chattanooga, which is now part of the University of Tennessee.
What year were you in?
My sophomore year.
Sophomore year. And what kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, it was startling as it was to the general population. Prior to Pearl Harbor, in the summer of 1941, my best friend and I, Sully Sullivan, whom I'd gone through high school and entered college with, and he was a fraternity brother of mine, decided that we were very sure that America was going to become involved in World War II, which eventually it did. But we both wanted to fly, and we decided that we would apply to the Royal Canadian Air Force and go to Canada and obtain our flight qualifications, and then when the United States got involved, we could transfer in grade and we'd be a step or two ahead of our contemporaries. We did apply and were both accepted. We were 19 years old and discovered that because we were not 21, it would be necessary to secure our parental consent for us to go to Canada and be trained as pilots. Well, Sully, as we called him, was the only son, only child of a single mother. His father had been horribly wounded by gas, mustard gas, in the First World War, and passed away when Sully was very young. So he was all his mother had. She was a telephone operator in Chattanooga. But she said, Sully, if you really feel that this is what you should be doing, you have my blessing. So I went home and immediately confronted my parents likewise for parental consent. And my mother essentially said the same thing Sully's mother did. But my father took an entirely different viewpoint. He said, you're idiots. It's not our war. You're not involved. You're sticking your neck out, and we may never get involved, and you do not have my consent. So to make a long story short, Sully went to Canada, was commissioned, and went through the North African campaign as a Spitfire pilot, and was eventually posted back into England. By the time Pearl Harbor occurred, I joined up, went through training with the Army Air Corps, and obtained my license, and was assigned to the Bloody 100th Bomb Group, and appeared in England to meet Sully. So we actually did get together on one or two occasions in England, but sadly enough, he was posted onto a vicious British fighter called a Hawker Typhoon. And if you know about the Typhoon, it had a characteristic of tremendous torque, and in order to keep it straight going down the runway on takeoff, you had to keep full opposite rudder. And the day before, I was able to fly down to his base and return a call that he had made to mine. He was taking off on what they called a rhubarb mission, which was a freelance flight over enemy territory where they could shoot up anything they could see. And he got about 50 feet in the air and his engine quit. And of course, with full opposite rudder, he went straight in. So I buried him in England.
You were at his burial?
I was at his funeral. As I appeared the day afterwards on his base, not knowing what had happened, that this had happened to him, his commanding officer asked me to be the one to notify his mother that he had died valiantly. And I had to actually telegraph her that Sully had been lost. I visited her after I came back, and she said, "John, I want you to return his remains to the States. You're his best friend, and it's your obligation to do so." And I said, "Well, Ms. Sullivan, you know, there's a war on, and I don't know that they would permit that sort of thing, and I don't have any real influence in seeing that they do." But she said, "No, he's among foreigners over there, and that isn't where he belongs. He belongs here, and I want to see him returned." And so, unfortunately, I wasn't able to accomplish or fulfill her wishes, and she never spoke to me again.
Oh, that's very sad. Very sad. I mean, it was also rare for American flyers to even get together with British flyers, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was extremely rare.
Why do you think that was so?
I'm sorry?
Why do you think that was the case? You saw these guys
Well,
in
we
London.
we didn't have much of an opportunity. The only occasions were that if they were badly wounded, suffering battle damage and coming back from a raid and they landed at our base, we'd take them up to the officers' club and have a drink with them and have some connection under those circumstances. Conversely, if we landed at one of their bases and couldn't make it back to our own, they'd do likewise. Other than that, if we ran into them socially in London or any of the major cities like Cambridge or Norwich that we visited, we very seldom had the opportunity or the occasion to mix with them to any degree at all.
Reeling back.
Now, the women were something else.
Tell me about that.
Well, I think if you realize that at our tender age of early 20s, most of us were so glad that we were still alive that school was out, and the Brits were pretty scared of our approaches to their women folk, and probably rightly so.
Did you date British girls?
I did.
Where'd you meet
All
'em?
I could.
Where'd you meet them?
We had dances that were put on in local cities around our bases, and they would bring some of them to the base for dances. Glenn Miller played at Thorpe Abbott's, and I was there during Christmas of '43, so we had Christmas parties, and we certainly had invited them, and were grateful for their feminine companionship.
Anybody that you were steady with at the time, or?
After I completed my missions, or at the end of my tour, which occurred in early '44, I was dating pretty seriously a young British lass who was, I think, very intent upon marrying a Yank and coming to America. So in my own personal case, that didn't work out, but that was a likelihood, a possibility at any rate.
Did you run into them in the pub at all, in local pubs?
Yes, but not many of them would frequent those were more family oriented collection places, and drank a lot of beer and ale and played darts and that sort of thing with the local populace, but it very seldom included, let's say, marriageable age females.
They would bus you up to Norwich, though, right?
Yes.
And, lots
And-
of buses.
And,
must have been a
and
hell of a scene up there.
They would bring them to the base.
And the girls would get bussed in.
I'm sorry?
And the girls would get bussed in.
Yeah, the girls would get busted.
And then there's a curfew.
Oh, yes, there was a curfew, blackout conditions, so.
Yeah. What were the dances like?
Well, the dances were, of course, a real outlet for us. We let our hair down and jitterbugged and did all the things that were the fad at that time. As I say, we were pretty exuberant because we were just so thankful that we were still alive and had survived.
What was it like to have Glenn Miller on the base?
Well, that was a real treat. And of course, we were all terribly appreciative of the fact that he was touring the bases and making that sort of music and bringing that much of home as we knew it or as we remembered it to us.
Mm-hmm. And
Very sad when he went down, when he was lost.
Back in time a little bit, when did you join the 100th? When did you hook up with the 100th?
Hook up with
The 100th bomb.
the 100th Bomb Group. Upon graduation from flight school in 1943, I was in class 43B, which meant that we graduated in February. Along with 40 other of my classmates, we were immediately assigned to the 100th Bomb Group, which was a very unusual occurrence. Now, the reason that these brand new pilots, newly minted second lieutenants, were sent to this one organization, one group, was that the 100th Bomb Group had been prepared and had, by going through all of the necessary training preparatory to disembarking for England. And upon a last check ride that they were given to determine whether or not they were properly trained, they were on a mock bombing mission to San Francisco from Kearney, Nebraska, which was where the 100th was quartered at that time. Unfortunately, they encountered a huge cloud bank, and the entire formation was scattered, split up. One crew landed in Virginia, another crew landed in Tennessee, and very few of them even got to the West Coast, much less completed the bombing, so-called bombing mission. We later learned why those that came east landed where they did was because they had girlfriends there. But it was determined that the lack of air discipline disqualified them from being dispatched to England. And as a result, they realized that the co-pilots on all of the crews in the group had accumulated more hours and experience with the aircraft than most of the first pilots in other groups and replacements that were being sent overseas. So they withdrew all of the co-pilots and stuck us into the right seat of these huge 4-engine bombers. You might appreciate that this act did not sit too well with a lot of the airmen because they had been all the way through the training together, learning to act and work as a unit and rely upon each other to do their respective jobs. And suddenly, at the last minute, to have the second in command of the crew withdrawn and replaced by a brand new, hairy-headed graduate of flying school with no experience in the aircraft at all. So what did they do? They split the group up into 4 squadrons, sent them to various bases to be instructors to those crews that were going overseas. That didn't last too long. It lasted for about a 30-day period. And at that time, early '43, they were so desperate for heavy bombers in England that the squadrons were reassembled in Kearney. We were issued brand new B-17s and said, well, you guys are such goof-offs, you're going to kill yourselves anyway, so off you go. And we flew to Bangor, Maine, and from there to Gander Lake, Newfoundland. And we had to remain in Newfoundland until we were blessed with a favorable tailwind in order to make the 12-hour jump across the North Atlantic to Prestwick, Scotland. We were so heavily loaded with extra fuel and all of the things we were taking over, we weren't able to make it unless we had a favorable tailwind. So here's one of the stories you might not want to repeat. When we arrived in Gander Lake, and we were sitting around cooling our heels, waiting for a favorable tailwind, the pilot of the crew that I was assigned to, whose name was Glenn Dye, D-Y-E, saw fit to go across the base and to have a rendezvous with a WAC, and contracted a raging case of venereal disease and was thrown into the hospital there in Gander Lake. So the rest of the group went ahead and proceeded to Scotland, and we sat there for almost 2 weeks additional, waiting for him to recover. When he finally did, having been treated with nothing but sulfa that was all that they used in those days, he was so weak he couldn't get in the airplane. So we had to load him into the left seat, and that meant that I had to fly the airplane, which I did. And prior to that time, the navigator and the bombardier on the crew had taken a violent dislike to me because I had replaced someone that they really thought the world of, the co-pilot, and had proceeded to make my life as miserable as they could. So I called them both in, and I said, now, we can't get to combat unless you depend on me. I'm going to have to get us there. But I told the navigator that he was going to have to hit the landfall in Scotland on the nose, or I would personally throw him out of the airplane. Conditions or atmosphere and relations, of course, improved a little bit as a consequence of my being that assertive. But still in all, and I know that there is a general feeling that as a band of brothers, so to speak, in an air crew, that you're all for one and one for all. But that was not actually the case in every instance. It wasn't in mine.
Yeah. So the friction was always there. The friction was always there.
The friction remained.
Muted.
To a lesser degree, but it certainly remained, yes.
Yeah.
And that was not the only incidents, actually, in my combat experience that I can relate, that you had the greatest respect or admiration or looked up to a superior officer. There were other instances where it was not somebody that you would have chosen to be friendly with or to want to have to depend or put your life in jeopardy with.
Yeah. I can't imagine how fast you were transitioned into a pilot.
Well, the transition to a pilot, to being qualified and getting our wings, was traditional, and that was normal. The transition to the B-17, or to combat,
yeah.
was entirely different. And the Bloody Hundreds suffered severely from the fact that we were thrust into combat with virtually no instrument training. And if you're going to fly in Europe, and particularly in England, not being able to be proficient in instrument flying is going to kill you. And some of our earlier losses were horrendous simply because we couldn't cope with the weather.
Huh.
We would take off fully loaded, fuel, bombs, crew, and pull up into the overcast, which often was right down on the runway. And there'd just be a rosy glow at the end of the runway. The other danger was that not being able to properly fly instruments, we were in great jeopardy in mid-air collisions because quite frequently, taking off for an early morning raid, we would go up into the overcast at the same time that crews were taking off from other bases, only 5 or 6 miles distant. And our likelihood of colliding and we did have mid-air collisions. It was pretty prevalent.
Here you are entering a war that England's been at for a while. Did you sense any resentment on the part of the British about cocky Yankees coming over there and winning the war for them, so to speak?
I never personally was aware that of any such resentment. We didn't have a great deal of direct contact with the British, either the military or the civilian. It was very limited. In the pubs sometimes, after they were pretty much in their cups, someone might express a pretty bitter opinion of the Yanks. We invaded their country. We virtually took it over. And by and large, they were obligated to us, or they should have been. And yet, we didn't view it that way. And we were miles from home and in a foreign country and dealing with customs and attitudes that were unfamiliar to us. But I don't know that we really encountered much that I could call adverse feeling about our being there. There was a saying that was bandied around pretty widely, that there were 3 things that they really didn't like about us. And the first was that we were overpaid. They said, "I say, old bloke, you chops are paid more in a week than we're paid in a month." And the second is, you're oversexed. You chase our women like they're the last females you were going to see. And the third is, you're over here.
Did you feel mentally that you were ready for combat?
To be truthful, I don't know that anybody could be.
Okay.
We had no conception whatsoever of what we should expect, what combat really entailed. You went out day after day after day into extremely adverse conditions, weather-wise, cold. My most vivid memories of my time in combat are cold, cold, cold. We had to wear such protective equipment that we looked like Martians. We couldn't even get out of the airplane normally because we had to wear all of this cumbersome heated flying suit, underwear, and sheepskin lined leather equipment. In order to survive at altitude, you had to have this oxygen mask clamped to your face. And at the altitudes that we were asked to fly, we were encountering temperatures of minus 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit for hour after hour after hour. Nothing prepared us for that. We had no inkling that we would be contending with those kinds of conditions.
Did they tell you in training, did they give you any indication of the German air defenses, of the power of the German air defenses?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. It wasn't until we actually got there and went on missions that we had any inkling of what kind of defense, anti-aircraft, or the efficiency and proficiency of the Luftwaffe.
And so you had no idea either about the kind of terrifyingly high losses the 8th is experiencing in the fall of 42.
You couldn't be prepared for that. It was shocking. It was absolutely traumatic that you suddenly realized that when you got in that airplane and took off down that runway, it might be the last time you had contact with the Earth.
When was your first mission, combat mission?
June the 26th of 1943. Went to Le Mans.
What was that like?
It was a baptism of fire. We got hit very hard. We lost, I think, 3 crews on that mission. And it just went almost from bad to worse because we were not made aware to any extent at all that there was this raging debate going on between the Air Corps, the 8th Air Force, and Bomber Harris, the RAF. He was adamant that we should not, under any circumstances, attempt daylight, high altitude, formation bombing, even though we had the so-called secret weapon of the bomb site to increase our so-called accuracy of bombing. It was a fallacy, total fallacy. When you get up 5 miles above the earth and you're dropping a 500-pound bomb, there's so many forces acting upon it as to determining where it's going to strike. And you're in mass formation, so just a perfect pattern from a formation would cover miles on the ground. Mm-hmm. And to claim that that was strategic bombing, it was really ludicrous. And having tried daylight bombing, as I'm sure many people were aware, and the British found that the Luftwaffe was just so highly efficient that the losses were just unsustainable. And therefore they had more experience than we did and strongly encouraged, but we were not aware of this. We were sent out daily, not to question why, but to do or die. And that was pretty much our credo. So we each individually pretty well had to develop our own philosophy, our own ideology as to what we were doing and why we were doing it.
And what was yours?
Prayerfully, it was simply that, well, if I did my job and performed all of the things that were asked of me to the best of my ability, then that's all that could be expected, and that would be my best chance of survival. Ultimately, it occurred that it's strictly a matter of luck. Where you are at a given point of time, circumstances of their defenses, and whether the bullet had your name on it or not. It wasn't anything you had any control over whatsoever. Fortunately, in my own case, I had a guardian angel on my shoulder all the way, or I would not be sitting here.
So it's all Lady Fortune.
Absolutely. It was just the luck of the draw. Had I been on some of the missions that were flown during my combat tour, like Regensburg or Schweinfurt, which I did not fly, either one, and I cannot tell you why. I have no idea. But had I been asked to do that or ordered to do that, I seriously question that I would have survived.
What was the mood on the base after those missions? What was it like?
The mood?
The mood on the base after those catastrophic missions.
Well, it was a downer. We had to ensure, and I served as an operations officer for both the 351st and the 350th Squadrons. And as the operations officer, you had to make sure that all of the personal effects of those that didn't return were immediately removed for two reasons. One was you didn't want to have the negative effect on the morale of the survivors. And the second was that you had a replacement crew coming in and had to have a place to sleep. So all of their quarters were cleared out. You moved another crew in. Sometimes they only lasted a month, a mission or two, because they were thrown into the fray with very little practice, very little experience, very little knowledge of what to expect and how to expect it.
Did you feel like you were guinea pigs in an experiment?
At times, but you didn't have any idea what to do about it. I can't tell you how many times I'd be sitting there with the flak and the fire and all hell breaking loose and thinking, how in the world did I ever let myself get in this spot? But there you are, and the most you can do about it is to concentrate on what you were supposed to be doing, and that was flying formation. And so if you directed your attention, your focus was maintained on your job, that was your best chance of survival. At least that was what worked for me.
Did you have a feeling that your bombing was working? That it was damaging the enemy?
Unfortunately not, because in the early days we were operating under rules of engagement that if our bombardiers were not able to visually identify the target due to cloud cover or whatever, you were not allowed to bomb. You had to bring them back and drop them in the channel. The channel is paved with undropped bombs. But the realization that in many cases, if we fail to get to the target, if we fail to hit the target, and we had very poor accuracy, and we knew that we hadn't accomplished the objective, we'd have to get in that airplane again the next day and go out and do it again.
That's what I don't understand. I mean, maybe understand's not the word. You're taking staggering losses. There's a feeling that the bombing is ineffective, and yet you have to go and perform.
Mm-hmm.
And what gets you into the planes? So you're saying it's kind of a private battle that But you're fighting with yourself?
It
Hold
is,
yourself
and it's
together.
somewhat peer pressure. You don't want to appear afraid to your peers. It's something of a bravado that you have to adopt to say, well, you know, I'm invincible. It's going to happen to somebody else. It's not going to happen to me.
Is that how you steadied your nerves?
It helped. It helped.
That's got to go away after a while, doesn't it? though?
But yes, it does. That becomes pretty hollow after a while.
And then what replaces it?
Then you go to the flak house, or you just refuse to fly. And that was rare, but it did occur. Some just were not physically and mentally able to cope with that kind of pressure over a period of time, and they cracked. We had that happen. There's no arguing about it. I have a documentary film, as a matter of fact, that was made by the British called Whispers in the Air, about those that refused to fly, both in the RAF and the 8th Air Force. And they were more numerous than we were ever led to believe, but that was minimized by removing them from the scene as quickly as possible and getting them out of sight and mind. And you simply did not want to allow that negative approach to permeate the organization, or you were done for.
Did anyone ever crack in your plane?
I had one gunner, yes, who went berserk, and he was wounded, which was some reason for his demise, I think. But so I replaced him. I got him off the crew. He didn't cause any real damage to.
How did he manifest this? I mean, how did he?
Well, he began shouting over the intercom of, we're coming in, we're going down, we're done for, we ought to bail out, and that sort of thing, and the rest of the crewmen just had to subdue him.
Hold him down, or? Yeah.
I really,
Were you in?
being in the cockpit, I don't really know what they
Yeah,
did.
were you in combat at the time?
Oh yes. We
You were under
definitely
fire
in
at the
combat,
time.
and that was a result of the combat
Yeah.
that I think he reacted negatively. But it was just another incident where the
John, yeah, did you have,
overwhelming effect of it was more than they could take.
were you required to report that?
I don't know that we were required to, but we did.
Okay.
Because I did, because I had to justify why I wanted him off the crew.
Right.
So that reported it. I just said this individual is not reacting properly, and it's detrimental to the
Did you go to
morale.
the squadron commander with that first?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who was your squadron commander?
Ollie Turner.
Ollie Turner. Yeah. And how did he react when you told him?
Well, he didn't question it. We did get a replacement for that crew member, and that's the last I heard of it. They sent him to the flak house. He was never around the base again.
Did the medical officer on the base have a role in that? Did he have to? I mean,
They could have been brought into play. I don't recall specifically how they dealt with it. They were certainly aware that such things occurred and were occurring, and how they were supposed to deal with it, I don't know. The peer pressure was tremendous
I can imagine.
because you were so closely associated with other crew members, particularly in one airplane or one crew, and to some extent the various crews in the same squadron or the same formation. but the possibility of that sort of thing occurring was certainly very paramount, very permanent.
Did you know at the time that there was a place called Central Medical Establishment
Never heard of it.
where severe
not.
cases were sent?
Not aware of.
Yeah. Your entire service, you were not aware of that?
Entire time I was there.
Is that right? Did guys go to the chaplain?
Oh, yes, yes.
He played a role?
And the chaplain played a role, and in particular, prior to the mission. Once you found out what the target was, what you're going to be, you had some semblance of mind as to what you were going to be encountering on that particular mission. The chaplain was sought out immediately by more and more people every day. Mm-hmm. And that was a matter of solace, and it was a matter of individual coping with your own mindset and your own attitude and your own action and reaction with regards to doing what you had to do. But I don't know really the explanation for why you keep doing it. We were young, we didn't know any better. I really feel that we were somewhat stupid about allowing ourselves to do it, but you didn't have any choice. You were ordered to do what you did, and you were committed to doing what you were asked to do.
Yeah.
Now, to call us the greatest generation because of that, I think is a misnomer. I honestly feel that that's an statement.
I think so too.
We did what we had to do when we had to do it, but it wasn't to wrap the flag around ourselves and claim to be heroes. If we survived it and came through it, why, so much the better. But many of them, of course, many of us were shot down and spent time in prisoner of war camps, and that, to me, would have been one of the horrors of the war. And I don't know that I would have coped with that as well as I actually coped with completing my combat tour.
Did they ever get any of you guys together and tell you, you know, if you go down, this is how you're going to try to evade the Germans, these are the escape routes. If you're captured, this is how you conduct yourself. Does anybody talk about that? It's incredible.
Didn't have any time. There really wasn't time for that kind of training. We were so consumed with preparing for the next mission, doing what we had to do to get ourselves ready to go again, that to try to philosophize or to rationalize or to instruct you as to how you should behave. We were told, and we carried escape kits with a picture of us in civilian clothes to help in producing false passports and identification papers, and we were given 2,500 French francs and a little compass and these waterproof silk maps of the rail system in Europe and the road system, all of this sort of thing that would be helpful if you were fortunate enough to get into the hands of the Maquis. But they were in such danger, and they had to be so sure that you were not a plant, that you weren't actually masquerading as an American soldier, that even if you did make contact with them, they wouldn't always help. So that wasn't a sure way of evading either.
Did any evaders make it back to Thorpe Abbotts?
Yes. Rosie Rosenthal was one.
Exactly. Did they talk to you?
Yes. And Rosie was a separate or a different case. Uh, Rosie was shot down and managed to evade and get back to the base, and of course he was welcomed with open arms, and everybody was very proud of him and what he did and how he did it. The rule at the time was that he could not fly combat any longer, having evaded, that there was a price on his head. If the Germans caught him again, they'd execute him, and therefore they wouldn't put him in that position. So he was ordered to go back to the States, but he refused to comply. He said, I came over here to fight, and give me another crew and another airplane, and I want to continue flying combat. And he did that. Not once, but twice, but 3 times.
Did you know him well?
Not terribly well. He was not in the same squadron that I was in. He arrived after I'd already completed about half of my missions, and we did not. I did meet him and socialize with him in the officers' club. Found him to be very personable and very likable, and admired what he did. And of course, when he was the sole returnee from the Munster raid on October the 10th, which I again did not fly because I had just become the operations officer on October the 8th over the first mission that I flew on Bremen. He was a hero to us. We respected him highly, and I don't know why that he knew why he was the sole survivor of that mission, but he didn't make it all the way back to Thorpe Abbotts, but he did make it back to England.
What did you think about Clevin and Egan?
Well, I didn't know them well. I knew who they were because they were both squadron commanders, and their reputations preceded them. Their personalities were certainly noted and noticeable. I think you have to realize, or as I did, that with a group where 3 out of the 4 squadron commanders were nicknamed Buck, that you had something to contend with. But they were both pretty flamboyant and likable. They were highly regarded. The people who flew with them and for them, I think were happy to do so.
Must have been a blow to lose 2 guys like that in just about a week.
Yes, that's very demoralizing.
Yeah. If guys like that can go down, you know, anybody can go down. This whole idea of learning the war as you're fighting the war is creepy. It's pretty incredible. I'd like you to talk a little bit about your Bremen mission.
Well, the Bremen mission was my first mission after the crew that I originally went into combat with completed their tour. The reason that I still had 4 missions to fly was that when our crew was the lead crew of the group, then as a co-pilot, I was replaced by a command pilot. And the operating rule was that the co-pilot then went to the tail and became a tail gunner in the lead ship, ostensibly to be a fire control officer for the entire formation. Well, whatever idiot dreamed that one up ought to be castrated, because you don't have any control, you don't have any communication with anybody but the pilot. And if any danger presents itself from that direction, you can't communicate with anybody else and warn them about it. All you can do is tell the pilot has to switch channels and broadcast, and we couldn't break radio silence in most cases until we hit the target. So it was foolish, absolute folly to put a highly trained pilot in a tail gunner's position who'd never fired a .50 caliber in their lives. So I sat there like a knot on a log. Both my guns froze up. I didn't know what to do with them. And I was perfectly useless. The Germans by that time had developed a technique of pulling up behind their formation with their twin-engine Me-110s and 210s and just lob rockets through us out of range. We couldn't lay a bullet on them. So they were very effective from that standpoint, but putting a pilot in the tail, a co-pilot in the tail of the lead plane didn't alleviate that situation one iota. But I flew 2 missions as tail gun. Got credit for them, but I was useless.
What was your toughest mission? What was your toughest mission?
Bremen,
Bremen.
the October 8th raid on Bremen.
Tell us a little more about that.
Okay. That was the first mission after the crew I went over with finished, and I still had, this was my 22nd mission. And I had a new crew that came into the group, or a new crew did as a replacement, and I was assigned by the operations officer to be an instructor pilot with that new crew and to replace the co-pilot. So I was flying in the lead element of the low squadron, the second element of the low squadron, of the low group in the whole formation, which was known as the Purple Heart Corner, because that was closest to the anti-aircraft. And as we turned on the target at the IP, the initial point, to make our bomb run, the flak was so intense, and so was the fighter coverage, flying through their own flak. And we'd never experienced that before. Usually when we would get near the target, which was heavily defended, the fighter escort would lay back, or the Luftwaffe would lay back and not attack us until we had bombed, and then were turning off the target, and then they would hit us with all they could, at least to try and cripple some and then pick us off. But on this particular mission, as we turned on the IP, we lost 12 ships out of the 18 instantaneously. And the ship directly in front of me, the pilot was Tom Murphy. Tom was flying his 24th mission, and he had the operations officer, Al Barker, as his command pilot. And I noticed I was flying the formation tucked right under their tail, and as close as I could get. And I saw out of the corner of my eye these 2 Focke-Wulf 190s approaching our squadron. I mean, they were zeroed right in on us, and they never veered an iota. They came right in, and the pilot of the lead pilot collided with Murphy right in front of me, and they blew out of the formation and went down in flames. The wingman collided with my wingman, and he went down in flames. And I had lost an engine due to flak over the target, and looked around, and we went ahead and completed the bomb run, such as it was, but we were 6 ships left, and I fired a flare, and they rallied on, the 5 others rallied on me, and we attached to the next wave of, which was the 95th group that was coming behind us, slightly above us, and filled in for an entire squadron that they had lost. And that's how we got back. So on landing, the squadron commander approached me and he said, "Well, where's Barker?" And I said, "Well," I told him what happened, and he wasn't coming back. And he said, "All right, then you are now the operations officer for the 351st. And I was then a second lieutenant. Still a second lieutenant. I didn't get promoted till the end of November of '43 to first lieutenant.
Morale must have really hit the bottom at the end of October, you know, after Marienburg, Bremen, and Munster, you know, catastrophes.
Well, the Marienburg was the 9th of October and Munster was the 10th.
Yeah,
So that was the early part of the first half of the month.
yeah, yeah. To take those kinds of bang, 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 bang
Yes.
losses.
Those were three heavy blows. But because I had assumed the job of being operations officer, I didn't fly Marienburg or Munster.
What about this idea about why you're fighting, why you're flying and fighting? You know, I mean, did you have any hatred for the Germans? Did you have any sense of what was going on inside that country?
I think we had a healthy respect for the Luftwaffe. The German people and Hitler, I think we did dislike intensely, and you pretty much had to do what we were being asked to do.
Well, you know,
But we didn't have time to dwell on that. We really didn't have, I don't think we ever had any discussions, you know, barracks talk, things of that nature that would have indicated what our thoughts or any of our colleagues' thoughts were. We really didn't have time to dwell on it, nor did we have time to dwell on whether we were killing mothers and babies, which we were accused of doing, that our bombing was indiscriminate and that we were killing innocent people, and that was not according to Hoyle.
Huh. Do you feel like you were fighting for your country? I know you're
Yes,
fighting for your...
I think most of us thought we were fighting for freedom. We were defending our way of life. We were defending our freedom that the United States stood for. And it was, while it was noble, it was certainly in some cases very costly because you were putting your life on the line. And whether or not it was worth it, at some point you have to come to grips with and say, well, you know, fun's fun, but this is folly. It doesn't prove anything. There are no winners in war. They're vanquished and they're victors. But the war itself, and in and of itself, is really a futile exercise.
Did you think that at the time?
I did.
You did.
Now, I don't know that others shared that.
You didn't express that?
I can't, no.
No.
I did not. But my personal feeling was, and since then, those thoughts have certainly been confirmed with all of the knowledge that I have gained about what actually was taking place, as it was taking place, and why it was taking place, which we had no inkling of or no way of knowing about. It confirms my conviction that that war is certainly a no-sum game.
Yeah. You know, this is an unrelated question, but you're sitting in that briefing room before a mission, and what amazes me is there's so much information being thrown at you. Weather, flak. How do you assimilate all that in such a short period of time? I mean, this is the first you've learned about this.
Well, you know when your life is going to depend on your remembering it, or your absorbing it, or your acknowledging it. It puts a different connotation on your ability to assimilate it and to remember it. You're on tenterhooks, and if you're being given information that could save your life or avoid injury, likelihood you're going to remember it is pretty high.
Did you talk to your crew before the mission out on hard stand?
About the only thing that went on prior to mission, prior to getting into the airplane, between the briefing time and the actual takeoff, was assurance that everybody knew what they were expected to do, that they had prepared as well as they could to fulfill their obligation, and that they were going to be depended upon to fulfill it, and to be fairly jocular and high-spirited about it, to carry the day. But no, we didn't have any serious conversations. We didn't gather around and all kneel in silent prayer or go through any ritual such as that. At least my crew didn't, and I didn't know of any others that did. But you were individually trying to cope with your demons and keep your sanity and keep your focus on what you were supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it.
When did you go home?
I finished my last mission on the 13th of February of '44 and stayed on the base about 30 days, and then they shipped me over to Liverpool, and I was returned on the USS Washington. Took 12 days to make the crossing, to become an instructor pilot on crews that were then being sent overseas because the war was still at its height.
Last point, what did you tell those guys?
I told them everything that I thought I could impart that would prepare them for what they could expect, without overdoing it or without trying to just scare the pants off of them. Because the reality of it was that they were going to what could be a sure death. And that the job that they were confronted with performing required that they concentrate and focus and keep their sanity and keep their spirit up to perform it to the best of their ability. And I felt that that was about the most that I could do, other than to try and weed out those that I felt were not capable of meeting those requirements.
Well, that's a lot.
That was the job that I set up for myself, because I formed a combat crew inspection section that did nothing but review the crews that were going over and evaluating them as to whether they were combat ready or not.
Was it hard finally to drive the war out of your mind?
I'm sorry?
Was it hard to drive the war out of your mind?
Yes. I drank a lot. I was so happy to be alive. I really didn't care whether school kept or not, to be honest about it, because I had survived. The first thing they did when I returned to the States was to send me to the instrument pilot school to learn how to fly instruments. And in my wife's vernacular, that's evidence of military intelligence. But fortunately, that's where I met her, and so it wasn't all a downer. From there, I was sent to Lockburn, Ohio, to instrument pilot school for B-17s. And then I went down to MacDill Field and established this combat crew inspection section. And I did that for a couple of years. In the meantime, checked out on B-29s, transitioned to B-29s, and was ready to be shipped over to the Pacific when they dropped the bomb.
Wow.
And the war was over.
Incredible story.
Thankfully.
Thank you so much. It was a great interview. Mesmerizing. Fantastic, John.